Don't buy an apartment in New York City until you understand the taxes associated with the purchase. Like everything else with New York City real estate, taxes are unique and handled differently in New York City. So you need to understand it because it will impact the decisions and the kind of property that you purchase. So let's break it down and talk about it. I'm Dewey Moss. I'm your New York City real estate resource. Please take a moment to like, subscribe, and hit that notification button so that you can stay up to date on all things New York City real estate. And let's get started. What's that old saying about taxes and death being the only two sure things in life? Well, hopefully your taxes won't lead to your death in New York City, because you really do need to understand how they are handled in New York City so that you're not caught off guard. And there are two kinds of taxes that you need to be aware of that are handled differently. There are your property taxes, your quarterly or monthly property taxes, and how that's handled, and then the taxes associated with closing on a property. So let's talk about the property taxes first, because it does inform some of the closing taxes you'll have. The first thing you need to understand about your property taxes are that not every building has property taxes for you in New York City. So what do I mean by that? Well, in order to have property taxes, you must own real property. So real property are condos or something like a full building, a brownstone or a single family house. Much like any other market in the United States, whenever you buy a house, that is real property. However, in New York City, we have co-op buildings. And with co-ops, you're buying shares in the company that owns the building. You do not own real property. Therefore, on co-ops, you do not have personal property taxes. So with condos and single-family residences or brownstones and buildings like that, you are going to have your quarterly tax payment. That is a percentage of the assessed market value of the unit. And there are 4 classes of taxes in New York City, 1 through 4. Most residential buildings fall into class 2, and that is taxed at a rate of 12.5%. Now, I say that on co-ops, you don't have personal property taxes, but there are property taxes on the entire building, and that gets put into your per share cost, just like the mortgage payment does on a co-op. So mortgage payments, property taxes, the underlying costs for the building are divided up per share, and however many shares you own in that company is how much of that you would then pay. So in short, with co-ops, no personal property taxes, but you'll have taxes underlying the building that is a part of your monthly maintenance payment. And with condos and other real type of property, you will have your quarterly or monthly tax payment that is separate from your common charge payment. Now, when it comes to the taxes associated with your closing costs, you may have up to 3 or 4 kinds of taxes. You may have 0 taxes due. It largely depends on the kind of purchase you make and if you are or are not financing, and the amount of the purchase factors into it as well. So what do I mean by all of that? Well, first off, I talked about condos versus co-ops, real property versus buying shares. If you are buying condos, or if you're buying some sort of real property and not shares in a co-op, then if you are financing, you will be subject to mortgage recording tax. That mortgage recording tax is 1.8% on mortgages under $500,000 and 1.925% on mortgages above $500,000. So if you are going to take out a large mortgage, that's going to be a pretty hefty tax there as you start your closing cost. If you are buying a co-op, however, you are not subject to that tax. So there's a little bit of savings there on your closing costs. You're not buying real property, and even if you are carrying a mortgage on a co-op, there is no mortgage recording tax due. So we often say that co-ops are a more economical purchase than condos, and they are, simply because oftentimes the purchase price is a little lower in comparison to condos, but your closing costs and your taxes are going to provide a significant savings. Another tax that is unique unique to New York City is called the mansion tax. And that kicks in at $1 million purchase or more. Even if you are spending $999,999.99, you will not be subject to the mansion tax. It starts at $1 million and above. For $1 million to $2 million, that mansion tax is 1%. Starting at $2 million, it's 1.25%. And then there's a sliding scale pretty much per million, all the way up to, I believe, 29 million, where it's 3.9% of the purchase price. So for example, if you're buying a condo above $1 million, you're going to have the mansion tax in addition to the mortgage recording tax if you are carrying financing. If you're buying a co-op, you will not have that mortgage recording tax, but you will have the mansion tax above $1 million purchase. Now, the next two kinds of taxes are not normal for a buyer to incur, but on occasion, you may see this happening. One of those taxes is called the flip tax, and that generally pertains to co-ops. Co-ops are designed to create a strong and consistent community, so they often have what's called a flip tax to keep people from coming in and flipping the properties and for there to be a high turnover in sales within the building. That flip tax can vary from building to building because the co-op and the bylaws set what that flip tax is. It can be 2% of the purchase price. It could be a flat fee. It could be some other kinds of combinations of charges per share for the owners. Typically, this is paid by the seller on occasion, and your agent that you're working with needs to do this research so that you understand the taxes involved and the potential that you may have to pay. A buyer will have to pay the flip tax because the seller is saying, in order to buy this from me, I want you to pay that flip tax. But 99% of the time, it's paid by the seller. Even if a seller is saying that to a buyer, that is a negotiable point. So you should have your agent try to push back on that, say, hey, this is a really great offer, but we need you to pay that flip tax because that's generally paid by the seller. So most time you will not incur that charge if you are a buyer, but it's worth knowing about just in case it comes your way. Finally, in every sales transaction in New York City, there is what is called a state and city transfer tax. This is always paid by the seller. It would take an extreme circumstance for it to come to the buyer, and it rarely, if ever, happens. But again, it is worth knowing about that it is part of the sales process and that the seller is paying a transfer tax for the city and the state. And certainly if you are selling something to buy something else, you will be subject to those transfer taxes. But again, always paid by the seller. It would take an extreme extenuating circumstance for that to come to the buyer. But again, worth knowing about that it's always a possibility. And there you have it. I hope this information is very helpful. Understanding the taxes is a pivotal part of making a purchase in New York City. And New York City real estate is so very unique. It's different from any other market in the United States. My best advice is always to find a buyer's agent who's going to really advocate for you, who's experienced in the market, who really understands every part of the transaction, and they can be by your side the entire time, because it is a difficult thing to make a purchase in New York City. And when you don't know what you're getting into, it can be made much more difficult. I would love to be that buyer's agent. So if you are thinking about buying in New York City, look at all the different ways you can get in touch with me. Otherwise, please like, subscribe, and hit that notification button so that you can stay up to date on all these New York City real estate tidbits, and I will see you next time.